Hey everyone, Nathan here, Absurd Being. Okay, so Henri Bergson, the second video on freedom. What do I need to say? Just very briefly, I guess we looked at in the last video metaphysical freedom, the freedom that we are, not the freedom that we have. We're not things that are free. We are freedom itself in our very core, in our very essence. As long as you understand that we're not crystallizing, we're not a thing, right? We're not something with an essence, but in as far as I can say it using words, metaphysical freedom, we are, that's the freedom that we are as that enduring process that we've talked about. And practical freedom, which is the freedom we get through the intellect, which lets us kind of step back from that continual process and take a position on certain things in there. It kind of puts some distance between us and our lives. It kind of creates the space for that to happen. And we looked at kind of very briefly 3 ways that Bergson talked about kind of affecting practical freedom from creative evolution. And we'll look at the first one of those, which was how the brain, or the role of the brain in this. We'll look at that in the next book. We get to Matter and Memory. He talks about that. He's got a really interesting take on the brain, which is something to look forward to. Okay, so anyway, that's just a very quick recap. Let's jump into the first topic for this video, which is going to be inauthenticity. Right, so inauthenticity, you remember in the last video we looked at authenticity. Very briefly, authenticity was, and again, Bergson doesn't use the word. I'm pretty sure he doesn't use that word. But the freedom that he described, and when we act from, when our behaviors kind of reflect the enduring process that we are, that succession of psychic states all interpenetrating each other, so kind of taken as a whole, that when we act from that's a free act, and that was, I think, a good candidate for authenticity. So an authentic act is an act which follows from that, when we're acting out of our true nature. Again, very kind of dodgy words. You've got to take them in the right way. Acting out of our true nature as that enduring process. So inauthenticity then is the opposite, and this would be acting not from your feelings, not from your psychic states all melting together into one another, not from that kind of holistic process which you are, and then constantly changing. So you as a process constantly changing. Every new moment is a new you, and the things that you see, even though you've seen them 100 times before, you're actually seeing them in a sense literally for the first time. That's what it is to be an enduring process. That's what duration is, right? So when you're acting not from your feelings, when you're acting not as this enduring process, which is constantly changing, constantly experiencing the new, something new, but when you're acting from unchanging images, which you've replaced those feelings with. So you've spatialized yourself, you've spatialized your experiences, your sensations, your feelings, your desires. Everything's been spatialized, put out, isolated, abstracted as things. When you're acting from those instead of out of your kind of your true, again, nature as that enduring process, then you're acting you're acting out of inauthenticity. Let's go there. So instead of experiencing things, instead of experiencing the world, instead of having genuine experiences, you experience fixed, objectified images which you've erected in their place. And in this way, when we act from here, we're acting from reflex. So there's no genuine interaction with the world. Your behavior is almost programmed, right? You're not acting out of any genuine. You're not acting out of a place of authenticity. You're not acting out of who you really are. You're acting out of conditioned responses. Thoughtlessly. You're not truly engaging. And this is the quote I have here. So, an impression, instead of disturbing my whole consciousness like a stone which falls into the water of a pond, merely stirs up an idea which is, so to speak, solidified on the surface, the idea of rising and attending to my usual occupations. So there, a new impression should disturb our whole consciousness like a stone falling into the water. It should, because it's brand new. Even if we've seen it a million times before, walking to work or whatever, we've seen these same shops, the same street. We've seen it all 100 times before. But if you are aware of yourself as who you really are, if you're in touch with that enduring process which you are, then it's all new. It must be. Every moment is a new moment. So every impression should create that, and if it does, then when you respond, when you act, you're acting genuinely, authentically. But instead, an impression, this is the way we normally act, an impression just creates or brings to mind an idea which is solidified, an idea, an image, a fixed thing. It brings up something which we associate it with, which maybe it's the scene from yesterday and the day before that and the day before that. So I don't experience the world authentically. I don't actually engage with the world. I engage with a mental picture I have, which I'm substituting for the real world. So that's kind of nice. And the result is, like I said, we act from reflex. It's kind of like we are just automata in that case. We're just following conditioned responses. And in this case, when we're acting inauthentically, association then applies. Remember, we talked about association in the last video, which is the kind of the main reason for disbelieving in free will, or disbelieving that we are free. And it says that one psychic state just is like the necessary cause of the next psychic state, and so on and so on. So you just get this chain of events, of psychic states. And that's not true for who we really are, for ourselves as one. Once we saw ourselves as that enduring process. But if we are acting inauthentically, then we've got this. What we do have are just fixed states, fixed images, which just pop up one after the other, without any engagement on my behalf, on my part. So this impression occurs. I get that image which I had the last time that impression occurred, and that's what becomes the main thing. So in this case, associationism actually applies. So when we're acting in this way, when we're not acting authentically, when we're not genuinely engaging in the world, you could say that determinism holds. You're no longer free, or you're no longer acting out of your freedom anyway. So that's what kind of Bergson has to say there about inauthenticity. Again, he doesn't use the word, I believe, if memory serves, but it fits in there nicely. So I thought I'd include it. Okay, let's move on to some errors that we often make when we're thinking about free will and determinism. Okay, so the errors, and these are they're not kind of broken down in time and free will the way that I'm going to break them down. Bergson doesn't give names for them. I'm going to kind of impose my own structure on the text. But the first era that we'll look at, I've called the investigative era. And this is the way that we tend to look for freedom when we're trying to ascertain, are we free or are we determined? We look for freedom in the ordinary and indifferent circumstances of life. And that's precisely where there is no freedom, where you won't find freedom in those kinds of situations. We just talked about it, right? And when you're walking to work and you see the same things that you've seen every day for the last 6 years, you don't find freedom there because you're not acting out of your freedom. You're acting almost like an automaton, right? You're acting out of reflex. You're not engaging authentically with anything. So there is no freedom there because you're kind of on autopilot. But those are precisely the situations where we look for freedom and then we don't find it. Surprisingly, surprise, surprise, and then we get the ruling that scientists have discovered where we're all determined. But where they're looking for freedom, they're looking for it in the wrong place. The best example of this, I think, is Benjamin Libet. If you haven't heard of him, it might be worth just checking it out. He performed some experiments in the 80s, actually, so a long time ago. But the basic gist was, he got people to come in. The goal was to raise their finger anytime they wanted. So they had complete freedom over when they would decide to raise their finger. And what they had to do is, there was a clock face with a hand moving around it. They had to note the time that they made the conscious decision to raise their finger. So note the time, raise your finger, done. And repeat, do that as many times as you like, I guess. And what Libet found was that the brain signal spiked, I forget the exact number, about 500 milliseconds before people reported making the conscious decision to raise their finger. And he called this the readiness potential. And the conclusion was that it shows that the brain's pulling the strings, the brain's making the decision, and you are just kind of coming along afterwards, and your conscious awareness is just flowing from that. So you're just this kind of epiphenomenon following along after the brain's already kind of made the decisions. So we're not free. That's the conclusion. And there are many things to say about that experiment and subsequent experiments done, which have shown several seconds. I think they've gotten up to now. They can see some kind of spike in the brain and brain signals and things which indicate a decision that's coming, or that prefigure anyway a decision before it's made allegedly. But the point that I wanted to make here is that, I mean, there's no freedom in that. It's such a meaningless act, right? Your free acts come from meaningful decisions you make when you're actively and seriously engaged with the world around you. That's what it is to be. That's how you engage that freedom is by acting as the enduring process that you are, right? If all you have to do is raise your finger anytime you like, the most meaningless, trivial, pointless act, that freedom that we are is not being activated at all in that. It's, if anything, it's just purely random, purely arbitrary when you're going to do it. So, I mean, you know, the fact that we don't find freedom in that, it's hardly surprising, is it? It's not an act which taps into that enduring process which we are, that freedom which we fundamentally are. So yeah, you don't see freedom, but you don't disprove freedom either. That's the idea. And also, I mean, this is a little bit off topic, but also another kind of experiment in a similar vein is experiments they've done to identify love, what love is, what kind of brain state is love, and the way they did it. This is in a book by Raymond Tallis called Aping Mankind, which was quite good. But he says they showed someone a picture. They showed someone pictures of random people, and then they showed them a picture of their husband or wife, or spouse, or significant other, or whatever, and registered, you know, performed the fMRI scan or whatever kind of brain scan it was, while they were looking at all of these photos, and just kind of took the photo, the brain scan when they were looking at the photo of their spouse, and the brain scans when they were looking at other photos of random people or friends or whatever, and just subtracted the difference and said, you know, that now we know what love is. That's what love is. If you think that's what love is, looking at a picture of your wife or husband, you have no idea what love is, right? That hasn't even come close to uncovering anything about love. So sometimes these psychological experiments, I think you have to kind of look into the details a little bit, actually, because some of them are pretty suspicious, maybe. But definitely, I remember reading that just being like, this is craziness. You know, they're trying to define love by looking at a photo and subtracting brain states from. You get something, I guess. You get some kind of data, but you're not getting anything about love, right? That's about as far from love as you could possibly get. And the same thing here. You're not getting freedom because you're not looking in the right place for freedom. There is no freedom in just randomly moving your finger. It's just not where freedom is. So when you don't find it, it's no mystery. It's no surprise that you haven't found it. It's not there. The second kind of error that I wanted to look at I've called structural. And this is the way that we usually imagine freedom consisting in an unchanging self, choosing between two unchanging feelings. Everything's clearly defined here, right? So already we know we're not dealing with ourselves as we really are. We're not dealing with that enduring process which we are. We're dealing with a spatialized image, a spatialized model even of reality. So everything's clearly defined. You've got this unchanging self, this little, and that's again, this is just how artificial it is. We imagine freedom. I'm this kind of detached self. I've got my desire for this over here, and I've got my desire for this over there, and I'm weighing up the alternatives, right? And then I choose one. Nothing's affecting anything else here. You know, it's such an abstracted, artificial picture. But that's often what we imagine freedom is. That's what people try and defend, and it's pointless defending that, because that's not what freedom is. It really is just a Cartesian mind, isn't it? You're imagining yourself as a Cartesian mind, not affected by any of these desires, not affected by anything else. It has to be unaffected. If it's affected, it's tainted. You're not free then, right? You're determined by all these other forces. Again, not the right way to think about it. We aren't detached minds, weighing up alternatives that mean nothing to us. We're engaged. That's where our freedom is. You'll only find that freedom when you're looking for it in that kind of situation, in a situation, not abstracted out from it. So anyway, we imagine that this is what you have to be in order to be free. This kind of impartial judge, spectator, weighing two alternatives. But if that's the case, Bergson says, no decision would ever be reached. You'd never make a decision between one or the other. In truth, the self, by the mere fact of experiencing the first feeling, has already changed to a slight extent when the second supervenes. All the time that the deliberation is going on, the self is changing and is consequently modifying the two feelings which agitate it. A dynamic series of states is thus formed, which permeate and strengthen one another, and which will lead by a natural evolution to a free act. Brilliant. What a great description of that. And it just so insightful, right? We're not this detached thing. We're engaged, and in the act of deliberating, in the act of thinking about this option, when I then turn to this option, that self that I was has already been changed. Just by the mere fact that I deliberated over this, I weighed some consequences, or I looked at some consequences of this act. The self that I was originally is no longer that same self. Sorry, the self that I am now is not the self that I was originally. It's been changed. When I deliberate on this, again, that changes me. It changes the two desires as well. Every time, this is a holistic, engaged process. It's not the abstract, detached situation we usually imagine it to be, and that we imagine it has to be if we're going to be free. It's a living process instead, and it's this living process which allows for freedom, which brings the possibility of true freedom. The error then is that by crystallizing everything and imagining an unchanging self, not only wrong, but the only possible outcome of such a picture is a mechanized account of human action. Nice. So that's the structural error. Well, I called it the structural error. I don't know, it's not such a great name, I think, but and the other, is this the last error? Yeah. So this is, and this the next, whatever. He looks next at the determinist and the libertarian arguments, if you like, their respective arguments. And this is one way they're often given. So the determinist says there's only one possible act corresponding to a given set of antecedents. The libertarian says that same series, all those same antecedents, could result in several different acts. So you've probably heard that before. The determinist, the situation could only possibly result in one outcome. The libertarian says that same situation could equally result in many different outcomes. The problem with both of these claims for Bergson is that they both consider the situation from the point after which the decision has been made. Meaning we're not contemplating the deed in the doing. We're not contemplating the deed as it happens. So we're not thinking in terms of duration. We're representing duration by space and a succession by a simultaneity. So and this is both of these parties make the same mistake. The determinist and the libertarian, both thinking about the free or the determined act, but they're thinking about it as an act that's already taken place, as an act that's already happened. And neither of them then are looking at the act itself. They've missed the act itself, which is where the freedom is. So the libertarian has also missed the freedom. And the determinist obviously has missed the freedom because that's their argument. But both parties have no chance of finding the freedom because they've taken the act or the decision or the event as something completed already. They've spatialized it. And that misses where the act actually happens, where the deed is performed. So when we reflect on the situation, and that's what both are doing here, that's the claim. Only one possible act given these prior events, or given these prior events, many possible acts. Both are reflecting on the situation and have turned that situation into a thing, not a process. They're analyzing it as a thing, not a process, as an object already completed, already finished, and about which we can dissect, analyze, break apart, and look for the connecting threads, look to see how it played out. And if you do that, you'll always find a sequence. There'll be a chain, right? A cause and effect chain. You'll always find that. There must be. That's what it is to be, to exist in the world, right? In the world that we live in. There is no uncaused event. But the question is, was it determined? Was that event determined by prior events? And you can't see that unless you're looking at the process as it happens, the event, the decision as it's made, because that's where the freedom is. So you have to approach this, the act or the decision, whatever it is you're talking about, as something in progress, as it was when it was happening. Not analyzing it as after it's finished, after it's complete, and the freedom that was involved in it has already crystallized into something solid, into something fixed. Then you'll never find it. So, and this is such a great insight, I think, such a deep insight here. Bergson says the determinist, in effect, is saying the act once performed is performed. And the libertarian is saying the act before being performed was not yet performed. That's all they're saying. They're not saying anything about freedom because they're not looking in the right place, which is in the act as it was happening, as it is happening. As it was happening, that's fine. But they've crystallized the act. They've waited until it's finished, or they've imagined how it's going to be once it is finished. And now they've turned it into a thing, which they then try and analyze, sift through to see if they can find freedom in it. And of course they can't, because it's already been fixed. It's already been isolated, abstracted out from the duration which it is, and which contains the freedom, or which is the freedom. So I really love that. The determinists are saying the act once performed is performed. The libertarians, the act before being performed was not yet performed. Neither of them are saying anything about the act itself. Brilliant. And here's my quote anyway. All the difficulty arises from the fact that both parties picture the deliberation under the form of an oscillation in space, while it really consists in a dynamic progress in which the self and its motives, like real living beings, are in a constant state of becoming. The self, infallible when it affirms its immediate experiences, feels itself free and says so, but as soon as it tries to explain its freedom to itself, it no longer perceives itself except by a kind of refraction through space. Cool. Cool. Freedom is only present in the doing. It's only present in the process. And that's not to say that we just have to take it on faith that it was free, but we have to look into, we have to kind of keep the act open when we're thinking about it, when we're investigating it. If we close it off, we'll never find it. We've lost it already. If we solidify it as a thing, as a completed act, then it's gone. And that's what both the determinist and the libertarian do when they are thinking of it in this way. Only, if you've got a set of preceding events, preceding situations, only one event can possibly follow. In the libertarian, if you've got that same set of events, many possible alternatives are available. Both of them are thinking about an event in the wrong way. That they've taken something which is organic, which is evolving and in progress, and trying to spatialize it, dividing it up into things which they hope to find freedom or no freedom within. And the result, neither of them find what they claim that they have found there. So let's move on to the second claim, the determinist claim here that Bergson looks at. So he says that another argument then is that once we know all of the antecedents, a higher intelligence would be able to predict any future decision. That's the idea. If you knew everything about a person, their psychic states, how they felt, you could predict any future decision they might make. But the way Bergson the way Bergson deals with this or follows this claim is to ask, what does it mean to know all antecedents here? So we're talking about people, right? So we're talking about psychic states. So that's what it would mean. In order to know all of the antecedents, we're talking about the history, the life history of a person. So you'd have to know all of their psychic states, including then their intensities. So it wouldn't be enough to just know, to have like a list, if you like, happiness, sadness, anger, and just kind of try and quantify it in this way. We have to know those qualitative intensities as well in order to gauge how they've gone into creating the person as they are today, and how that's going to affect any future decisions. So we have to know intensities of these psychic states. But that's obviously going to present a problem, because we talked about this in the first video. Intensities are qualitative by nature. So they're not something you can measure. That's a problem. So there are two options that we could take, Bergson suggests, or the determinists could take. They could say the first one is the dynamic option. So we know intensities by living them. So this higher intelligence then, in order to know all of the antecedents, they would have to live the psychic states themselves, because the intensities of the psychic states they're nothing we can put a number on. They're qualities or shades, they're coloring that pervades our being. So to know it, you have to live it. And that's the problem there, right? If you have to live the psychic states in order to predict a future decision, what you're saying is you have to be the person who we're talking about. So we've missed the aim already of the determinist claim, which is that a higher intelligence just knowing everything about a person could predict a future intelligence. Well, they can't know everything about a person, because to know everything about that person, they'd have to be that person. So this claim doesn't work. This option doesn't work. This dynamic option, knowing the psychic states through knowing the intensities of the psychic states through living them. Only the person whose life it is living these psychic states. The other way, though, is the static option. And so this would be to try and convey intensity through some kind of symbol. So having a system where you could assign some kind of symbol, a sign indicating a particular intensity associated with a psychic state. The problem with this is that, again, because this is a third person perspective, because you're looking at this other person as from the outside, the only way you could know what symbol to associate with a particular psychic state and thereby gauge its intensity is by looking at the result that psychic state had on future decisions. So you'd have to look at what happened in the future, and then you could infer the intensity of that of all psychic states in the past. But again, that's defeating the point, because the point was to predict those future states. If we have to know them in advance in order to gauge the intensities of psychic states, obviously that's not going to get what the determinist wants. So that's out. The third claim is that finally, giving up on the goal of prediction, the determinist could just maintain that all psychic states obey the law of causality, cause and effect, and it's just a chain, and you can't get out of it. The problem with this is that it assumes the same cause can reappear. Remember, we talked about this earlier with the conservation of energy, which holds for inanimate objects. So it holds for particles and things, I guess, that don't endure a system in which you have that kind of, that doesn't endure. But when it comes to living things, this is no longer the case. Two states can never, two states are never identical. A second state, even if it's the exact same configuration in every way, for a living thing which endures, that second state is always different from the first, because it includes the first, because there's a history to the thing. So no two psychic states can be the same. The second one occurs in a history which includes the first one. Good. And that means that causality, you don't have it can't apply here in the same way that it does for non-living systems. Every state is always a new one, is always fundamentally new, and so it and that defeats the law of causality, necessary cause, effect following from cause. He breaks it down, though, to look at why we tend to think this would work. even though, as we've just said, for a living thing, for an enduring thing, every state is brand new, and therefore doesn't follow necessarily from the state that came before, we still think that this makes sense, even when we're thinking about living things and things with psychic states. So how is this? Why is this? Well, he breaks causality into two kinds. The first is objective causality. So this is where you have a logical or mathematical necessity between cause and effect. And this means that the second phenomenon in some way exists in the first. That's what gets you that necessary connection. And this type of causality gets rid of duration and succession. It has nothing to do with duration or succession, because those, as I said before, with living things, they always result in something fundamentally new. There is always creation there. So this type of causality holds in systems or in situations where you don't have any duration or succession. The second type of causality is subjective. And this is the type that we see in ourselves. And this holds that a second state is only prefigured as a possibility in the first. And the way that he describes this, he says it's present as a more or less confused idea. So there's no necessary connection, but it exists as a possibility. And as I said, this being a subjective causality applies to living things, especially things like ourselves. So either way, no matter how you look at this, there's freedom here, because the idea which exists in the first state is always is only ever a possibility. I haven't explained that well. So the second state only ever exists in the first as a possibility, as an idea. And by definition, it means it's not always realized. That's what it is to be a possibility. So it gets rid of that. So we've got these two types of causality, objective and subjective. The objective has necessity, is characterized by necessity between cause and effect. The subjective causality is in the subjective causality, the second state is only prefigured as a possibility in the first, so not necessary. But what happens is the determinist combines both of these together at once, and in that way secures what seems like a necessary connection, a necessary causality, an objective causality from the subjective one, from the causality which is actually subjective. So they see, this is how he describes it, they see the effort by which one psychical state becomes another. And we see it as a free spontaneity. That's how we experience our psychic states following on from another. We don't see ourselves as determined. We can't see ourselves and our actions as determined. We always have that feeling that we are a free spontaneity. And we see it in the effort between psychic states. But we carry this notion of psychic effort over into nature, into the world, the realm of non-duration, right, where things don't endure. And there we see that by effort, again, we fudge the words though. There's no effort going on in nature, but we can kind of see it as a parallel, right? The effort from one psychic state to another, by which one psychic state becomes another. We look in nature and we see the effort by which one state becomes another state. And we see there's a parallel there. But obviously in the case of nature, the natural world, that is a necessary cause. There's no freedom in that. So we see that. And then the next time we think of internal effort, that effort by which psychic states change into other psychic states, it's now become associated with the effort that we saw in nature, which was necessary. So now we look at the effort in our own psychic states and our own lives, and it's now connected with necessity, the necessity that we saw in nature. And in that way, we kind of turn subjective causality into what appears to be an objective causality. But as we've already said, clearly that's fudging the distinction between the two and getting a result that's not really justified. Right. Let me revisit freedom once more, just to finish up. So in this last little section, I just want to kind of close up with an idea here. We've talked about metaphysical freedom as a relation between an act and the concrete self, the self that we really are as this enduring process. However, this relation is indefinable just because we are free. For we can analyze a thing, but not a process. We can break up extensity, but not duration. Or if we persist in analyzing it, we unconsciously transform the process into a thing and duration into extensity. All right, great. Another great quote. Really goes to the heart of the idea at the heart of Bergson's philosophy. This difference between a process and a thing, duration and extensity. But anyway, so talking about freedom, we are free, okay? So not things possessing the property of freedom. I've said that many times. We are fundamentally a process, and that's what is free, this process. Not a thing. We're not things, but only things are definable. That's the problem here. Only things can be analyzed and defined. Therefore, the only way we can define freedom through analysis is if we transform it into a thing. And if we transform it into a thing, it's no longer a process, it's no longer freedom. So you can't get there, you can't get to freedom you can't define freedom, you can't analyze freedom. Which isn't to say, again, that it's just some kind of mysterious thing we have to take on faith, or just we can only kind of gaze in awe before, and we can't really think about it all. But we have to, when we think about it, we have to think about it in the right way. We have to use words and concepts as the only tools we have. But when we're using those words and concepts, we have to be mindful that we are understanding those words and concepts in ways that don't conform to the usual categories of the understanding. So it's not that we can't think about it, we can't talk about it. We can, but we have to approach it kind of obliquely through our language and through our concepts. And if we fail to do that, we end up transforming what we're looking for into a thing, which is precisely what it is not. So freedom is there, it's what we are. And this is the point that I really wanted to make in this last section. Any positive definition of freedom will fail. To sum up, every demand for explanation in regard to freedom comes back, without our suspecting it, to the following question: can time be adequately represented by space? To which we answer, yes, if you are dealing with time flown. No, if you speak of time flowing. Now, the free act takes place in time which is flowing, and not in time which has already flown. Freedom is therefore a fact, and among the facts which we observe, there is none clearer. All the difficulties of the problem and the problem itself arise from the desire to endow duration with the same attributes as extensity, to interpret a succession by a simultaneity, and to express the idea of freedom in a language into which it is obviously untranslatable. Perfect. What a great summarizing idea there. Any attempt to prove freedom results in equating time with space, because a positive definition or explanation must use the categories of the intellect. It must conform to the intellect's, to the shape of the intellect, to the way that the intellect works, which is through space, through extensity, through throwing up, projecting, refracting time, duration into space. And that's it. Let's hit a summary quickly. So first up today, we looked at inauthenticity, and we saw that this came from actions which were grounded in fixed, objectified images. Images, in other words, the process which is us, which we have spatialized, which we've turned that lived experience into a set of fixed static images. Then we looked at some eras. We looked at the investigative era, which involved looking for freedom in the ordinary and in different circumstances of life. So looking for freedom in the wrong place, in places where we never act with freedom in the first place. The second one was structural, and this was the way that we imagine freedom has to happen, which is as an unchanging self, choosing as kind of a disinterested spectator between two competing options, neither of which interact with each other or with me as the chooser. So a very artificial picture of reality. Then we talked about the determinist and the libertarian. And the real insight here was that both of these, the two arguments, consider only the completed act. So they fail to think about an act in process. They only think about it after it's completed, by which time they've missed, the freedom is no longer there anymore. Then we looked at the two more claims that the determinist might make. The first one was prediction through knowing all the antecedents. But as we saw, to know everything about a person meant either being the person or required knowing the future acts in order to gauge the intensities of prior psychic states. And the last claim was through causality, which also didn't work because that's not a correct picture of the enduring process which we are. Finally, we revisited freedom, and the one main idea I wanted to point out there was that any positive definition of free will always fail. It's not something you can prove. It's not something you can demonstrate conclusively in an argument. And as soon as you kind of enter into that game, trying to prove it, trying to demonstrably show that we have free will, or we are free, you end up you've already lost from the beginning, because you're going down a path which will require eventually that you spatialize what is fundamentally duration. Cool. And so that's the end of this. So that's the end of freedom. There's one last thing I did want to talk about in this video, and I'll do that just now briefly. And it's from a comment actually from the prior video on freedom. related to something that Schopenhauer said, an argument Schopenhauer gives. Bergson doesn't address any of this. This is just something I thought might be interesting to weigh in on, to have a look at. So Schopenhauer famously said that we're not free. So we're not free. We're free, he says, to will what we want, but we're not free to want what we want. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that's the exact phrasing he uses, but we're not free to choose our desires. Is basically what he's saying. We're free to choose which desires to act on or how to enact those desires, but we're not free to choose those desires in the first place. And so the idea there is we're determined, right? We don't have total freedom. And the argument it's a powerful one, and it seems impossible to avoid. And I think a lot of people, if you haven't thought about it in too much detail, if you haven't looked at the context in which Schopenhauer uses the argument either, it seems pretty convincing. But it's so powerful because I think it's only operating on the level of what I called the ontic level, using a Heidegger term, or maybe another way to say it is that level of practical freedom that I talked about in the last video. So it seems unassailable if we think about it in those terms, as opposed to getting down to metaphysical freedom, which is where duration, when we've got that solid grounding to base our belief, I guess, that we're free on. And that's the point with Schopenhauer as well here. He's not arguing that we are determined, actually. We're free for Schopenhauer as well. But as the intelligible self, we're free. That's the self as thing in itself, as Kant's in Kant's realm of the noumena. We're free. Schopenhauer believes that. But he thinks that our empirical selves, the selves we are, that we're aware of in this kind of domain of existence, you could say, this in the world of appearance is really what it is. We're not free. When we always see a prior cause necessarily yielding a future effect. But that's the first thing that when people have kind of gone along with this argument, they've failed to see that first, that Schopenhauer makes a distinction. We are free, fundamentally, metaphysically, but it's just in this world of appearance, which is all that we have epistemological access to, we're determined. So that's the first thing that usually is passed over. And the second thing is, if we're going to look at this argument, we can't restrict it to if we're going to take this argument on its own outside of the context of Schopenhauer, it's actually making a metaphysical claim. And it works for Schopenhauer because his metaphysical claim is that as in the world of appearance, we are determined. We don't choose our desires. We're metaphysically determined in this world of appearance. And in the world of the noumena, the thing in itself, we're free. But in this world, so when he restricts it in that way, then it works for him, I think. But it's not presented in that way. And when people kind of present it as an argument on its own, it doesn't have the same force. And that's because we can look at this and say, okay, what is it saying? It's saying the definition of freedom is being able to want what we want, being able to choose our own desires. And in actual fact, then, what it's doing, it's making a reductio ad absurdum argument. It's saying that, so there are two premises. premises. The first one, freedom is being able to choose your desires. Second premise, we cannot choose our desires. Conclusion, we're not free. So that's kind of what the argument's saying. So if we want to challenge this conclusion, we have to deal with one of these premises. And the premise that is the real problem here is the first one. Freedom is being able to choose our own desires, to want what we want. And this just makes no sense. It's a ridiculous claim, because if it were true that I could be able to, that I could choose my own desires, it would mean that I would have to be different from my desires. There'd have to be some kind of gap. I'd have to be detached from them, in which case they wouldn't be my desires at all. If I had just kind of had them before me as two options, neither of which I'm invested in, mean nothing to me, and I could weigh them objectively, then in what sense are they my desires? In what sense are they what I want? There is no sense in that. So it offers this kind of artificial, incorrect metaphysical picture, and so I think we can dispense with that. The idea that freedom is being able to choose your own desires is wrong, because to be able to choose your own desires doesn't make any sense. So if freedom's going to mean anything, then it can't be that, because that's nonsense. Rather, and this is what the whole of the first video was about, metaphysical freedom. We are free. We are freedom in itself, in ourselves, as that process, as that duration. We are free fundamentally. It's not about whether we can choose our own desires, whatever that might mean, but we are fundamentally free as duration and succession. That's what we've already established. Practical freedom then is freedom in a situation, thrown into a world. There's Sartre in being in a situation, Heidegger being thrown into the world, and that is true freedom. So that is we can only say that we are free if we are in the world, if we are engaged in the world. That is to say, if I'm not viewing my desires and my preferences like a disinterested spectator. Absolute freedom in the way that the claim suggests is actually pure arbitrariness. It's got nothing to do with freedom. It's just, you've got two options, choose one. It doesn't matter which one you choose because you don't care. You're not engaged. You're not involved at all. So it's purely arbitrary. You're not free to act. If we think about this, the way that the claim posits, you're not free to act in a situation because you aren't in a situation in the first place. So my bottom line here is that premise one is it doesn't make any sense. The notion that we could choose our own desires is nonsense. And the other point is that for freedom to be freedom, that's not the test. The way that the argument has kind of led us to believe what freedom is erroneous. In order to be free, we don't have to be this impossible thing which can choose its own desires. We've got two senses of freedom. Freedom in our metaphysical sense, where we are duration, and freedom, practical freedom, in a situation, which means, again, not an arbitrary situation where I'm not even engaged. I'm not in a situation. Freedom can only emerge when we are engaged, when we are in the world, when I am my desires, not when I'm sitting back in some kind of detached role looking at the world around me and myself in it, as if none of this concerns me, as if none of it matters. So anyway, I hope that made sense. It made a lot more sense when I put it on paper. When I go to explain it, things kind of break down. But anyway, I hope that makes sense. I just wanted to say a couple of words about that, because it is an interesting quote, and I think something that we should address. But that's where I'm going to finish today. Thanks, guys, as always. And I'll see you in the next video for perception. We'll look at that, make a start on matter and memory. Until then.